This is the story of the most expensive record deal in music history, a $100 million signing bonus and buyout that quietly destroyed the company that signed it. In 2001, Virgin Records handed Mariah Carey a contract reported to be worth as much as $100 million, the richest recording deal anyone had ever signed, with a $21 million non-recoupable signing bonus at its center. 11 months later, that same company paid her millions more in a contract termination buyout, swallowed a loss of more than $50 million, fired the executives who built the deal, and within a decade, stopped existing as an independent company at all. Mariah Carey, the supposed failure in this story, kept around $49 million and signed a brand new deal within months. The headlines called it the collapse of a diva. The real collapse was on the other side of the table. We are going to follow this money, dollar by dollar, in 7 parts. We will show you the deal that broke records, the album that broke the company, and the $54 million hole almost no one ever reported. And by the end, we will show you where Mariah Carey's real fortune actually came from, an asset Virgin never owned and could never touch, sitting in plain sight the entire time. Part 1. The biggest record deal in music history. To understand why Virgin paid so much, we have to go back to where Mariah Carey came from. For the first decade of her career, she belonged to Sony through Columbia Records. The man who ran that label was Tommy Mottola, and in 1993 he became her husband. She was the best-selling artist Columbia had, earning multiple RIAA Diamond and multi-platinum certifications, and by her own account, she was also controlled by it. The marriage ended in 1998, and the working relationship ended right behind it. When Mariah walked out of Sony, every major label on earth saw the same opportunity. The best-selling female artist alive was suddenly available. Richard Branson's Virgin Records, owned by the British giant EMI, won the bidding war. In April of 2001, they signed her to a deal the press reported at somewhere between $80 million and $100 million, spread across 4 to 5 albums. The New York Daily News put the terms near $23 million per album. The previous record holders, Janet Jackson and REM, had topped out around $20 million per album, and Mariah beat them both. The headline number was a $21 million signing bonus, and this detail matters more than any other term in the deal. It was structured as a non-recoupable advance, meaning the money carried no strings, and she didn't have to deliver a single album to keep it. That distinction between a recoupable advance, which an artist pays back through future royalties, and a non-recoupable one, which is simply hers to keep, is the single most important financial detail in this entire story. Virgin also agreed to pay roughly $7 million just to cover the cost of buying out the last record she still owed Sony, and they handed her a 25% royalty rate with full creative control, the exact freedom Sony had never given her. Guinness World Records logged it as the largest record deal ever signed. The logic looked bulletproof. You take the most bankable voice in pop, you give her everything she ever wanted, and you let her print money across 4 albums. There was even a warning sign nobody read at the time. Just weeks earlier, Arista Records had re-signed Whitney Houston to a deal also worth around $100 million, championed by Arista's legendary chairman, Clive Davis. 2 of the biggest contracts in history, signed within weeks of each other, at the exact top of the market. Billboard would later call 2001 the year the bubble burst, and the first project riding on Virgin's $100 million bet wasn't even an album. It was a movie. Part 2. The album that broke the company. The project was called Glitter, a film and a soundtrack released together, and it was supposed to be Mariah Carey's Purple Rain. The story followed a young singer rising through the New York club scene of the early 80s. which gave the soundtrack its retro disco sound. The film alone carried a budget of around $22 million, co-financed by 20th Century Fox and Sony. Everything was built on one assumption, that Mariah Carey on a movie screen would be a cultural event. In the summer of 2001, that assumption fell apart. During an appearance on MTV's Total Request Live in July, Mariah behaved erratically on live television. Within days, she was hospitalized, with her team citing extreme exhaustion and an emotional and physical breakdown. Virgin pushed the release of both the film and the album back several weeks while she recovered, and that delay turned into a disaster nobody could have planned for. The new release date for the Glitter soundtrack was September 11th, 2001. The album landed in stores the morning of the attacks. There is a haunting photograph from that day showing the Twin Towers in smoke, with a glitter billboard standing in the foreground. In the weeks that followed, the country had no appetite for a disco movie about a pop star. The film opened on September 21st to about $2.4 million, landing at number 11, just outside the top 10. Its entire worldwide run brought in roughly $5 million against that $22 million budget. The soundtrack debuted with about 116,000 copies in its first week, when her previous album had opened with more than 320,000. It received no RIAA Platinum certification and became the worst-selling album of her career, and critics buried it. Mariah was handed a Golden Raspberry for Worst Actress, and the film settled onto lists of the worst movies ever made. For the company that had just paid a fortune to sign her, the very first release was a failure on every front: the film, the album, and her public image all at once. The new leadership at EMI looked at those numbers, and instead of waiting for the next album to recover, they made a decision that stunned the entire industry. Part 3. The fastest contract termination in music. In late 2001, EMI brought in a new man to clean house, a chairman named Alain Levy. He looked at the Mariah Carey contract, a deal that still had 3 or 4 albums left to run, and he did something almost unheard of. First, he fired the executives who had signed it: the label chairman, Ken Berry, a figure central to Virgin's entire identity in the 90s, and Virgin's vice chairman, Nancy Berry. Then he went after the contract itself. On January 23, 2002, EMI announced that Virgin Records America was ending its relationship with Mariah Carey, less than a year after signing her. The cost of making her leave was a contract termination buyout of $28 million. We have to stop and add this up, because this is the heart of the whole story. She had already collected $21 million, a non-recoupable advance she never had to pay back. Now she was being paid another $28 million to leave. According to her own attorney, Mariah walked away with around $49 million in total. So what did EMI actually get for that $49 million? One album, Glitter, a flop film, and the worst-selling record of her career. They paid close to $50 million for a single commercial failure, and then paid extra to make sure they would never have to work with her again. Look at this, from the company's side of the table. They had bet on 4 or 5 albums of guaranteed hits. They received one disaster, absorbed the entire loss, and then handed her tens of millions more to walk out the door and sign with a direct competitor. At the time, it was one of the most expensive contract terminations the music business had ever seen. The press treated it as the end of Mariah Carey, writing her off as the diva who demanded the biggest deal in history and got dropped after one record. But if you only read those headlines, you missed what was actually happening. The person walking out of this wreckage, richer and freer, was the woman everyone was calling finished. And the damage to EMI was far worse than the $28 million buyout the public saw. Part 4. The hole nobody reported. The $28 million buyout was only the number that reached the press. The real damage sat inside EMY's own accounting. In a disclosure to the London Stock Exchange, EMI revealed that the buyout, combined with around $26 million in write-offs tied to Carey's contract, would be booked as an exceptional charge. Add those together, and the true cost of the Mariah Carey deal lands at roughly $54 million. The Financial Times reported the charge at £38 million. That's the figure almost no celebrity story ever mentions, because it lives in a financial filing instead of a gossip column. Then the two sides started fighting over the story itself. Earlier that month, EMI had publicly denied paying Mariah anything to leave, telling the market it had made no such payment or agreement. Days later, the company filed a notice stating it had terminated her contract. Mariah's camp called that false and a breach of their exit terms, and her lawyers reportedly threatened to sue over the wave of record company dumps the Mariah headlines set off. The company that had just lost a fortune was now in a public fight with the artist it had paid to leave. And EMI was already in trouble before any of this. The company had issued a profit warning. Its stock had lost more than a third of its value, and two separate attempts to merge with other major labels had collapsed. The Mariah Carey deal wasn't an isolated mistake by a healthy company. It was one loud symptom of a giant in full retreat. If you're the kind of person who likes seeing the real money underneath the famous story, the part the headlines always skip, subscribe, and stay with us. Because this next part is where the company that signed her starts to disappear completely. Part 5. The comeback that hid the truth. The public remembers what came next as a simple redemption story. Mariah Carey hit bottom, then staged one of the greatest comebacks in pop history. And that comeback was real. Within months of the Virgin collapse, she signed a new deal with Universal's Island Def Jam, reported at around $24 million, championed by the executives Doug Morris and Lior Cohen, and she set up her own label imprint inside it. In 2005, she released The Emancipation of Mimi. It sold more than 10 million copies worldwide, earning multi-platinum RIAA certification, and its lead single, We Belong Together, became one of the defining songs of the decade. That's the story everyone tells, the fall and the triumphant return. But look at the money sitting underneath it. When an artist gets dropped after a flop, they normally leave with nothing, or they leave owing the label money they can never recoup. Mariah left Virgin with close to $49 million and complete freedom to sign wherever she wanted. And then she immediately signed another 8-figure deal somewhere else. The so-called disaster was, in pure financial terms, one of the best years of her entire career. She got paid a fortune for one failed album via a non-recoupable advance, got paid again to leave via a buyout, and walked straight into a fresh contract that launched the biggest comeback of her life. The failure didn't cost Mariah Carey. The failure cost EMI. And while the whole world was busy watching the comeback, almost nobody noticed where her real long-term money was actually coming from. It wasn't glitter. It wasn't even Mimi. It was something she had recorded years earlier, something Virgin never owned, something so small at the time that nobody thought to fight over it. We'll get to that in a moment. First, we need to count what was left of the company that signed her. Part 6. Count the survivors. The people who built the Mariah Carey deal didn't survive it. The Berrys, the executives who signed her, were already gone, pushed out in the house cleaning. And Mariah wasn't the only 9-figure casualty of that era. Remember Whitney Houston's $100 million Arista Records deal, signed just weeks before Mariah's, with Clive Davis staking his reputation on it. Within a few years, Both of those mega contracts were seen as cautionary tales, and they directly accelerated a shift in how labels structured deals. The industry's response was the so-called 360 deal, a new contract model where labels took a cut not just of album sales, but of touring, merchandise, and endorsements, an attempt to recoup massive upfront investments across every revenue stream an artist generates. The whole model of enormous single-income guarantees began to collapse, right as illegal downloading started gutting album sales across the business. And EMI, the giant that owned Virgin and wrote those checks, never recovered its footing. The company limped through the next several years, buried in debt. In 2007, it was taken over by a private equity firm. By 2011, control had passed to Citigroup. And in 2012, Universal Music Group acquired EMI's recorded music division for around $1.9 billion. The label that had bet $100 million on Mariah Carey no longer exists as an independent major. It was broken apart and swallowed whole. So count the survivors of this story, and the list is short. The executives lost their jobs, the label lost its independence, and then its existence. The $50 million bet produced one golden raspberry and a soundtrack nobody bought. And the only person who walked away from all of it richer, more famous, and holding the single most valuable asset in the entire saga was the artist everyone had written off. Which brings us to that asset, the one Virgin never even knew to fight for. Part 7. The fortune they never owned. Here is where Mariah Carey's real wealth actually sits, and it has almost nothing to do with the Virgin deal, or even with Mimi. Back in 1994, 7 years before Virgin signed her, Mariah sat down with her writing partner Walter Afanasieff and wrote a Christmas song. It went onto a holiday album for Sony's Columbia Records. At the time, it was just one track on a seasonal record, and nobody treated it as a major asset. That song was All I Want for Christmas Is You. Today, it is one of the most valuable songs on earth. According to Billboard, in 2022 alone, it generated around $8.5 million. That figure breaks down across multiple distinct revenue streams: performance royalties from radio and streaming, mechanical royalties from digital downloads and physical sales, and sync licensing fees every time it appears in a film, television commercial, or television show. In total, roughly $5.3 million came from the master recording, and another $3.2 million from music publishing. Estimates of its lifetime earnings run past $100 million. It climbs back to the top of the charts almost every December, and it holds the record for the longest-running #1 in the history of the American charts, 22 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100. Now look at why Mariah specifically earns so much from it. On most hit songs, an artist sits on only one side of the money, either the writing or the recording. Mariah sits on both. She controls her share of the master recording. She is a co-writer collecting music publishing royalties, and she is a co-producer, which means the song pays her from nearly every direction at once: performance royalties, mechanical royalties, sync licensing, and master royalties all flowing simultaneously. And Virgin never had any claim to a single cent of it. While they were burning $100 million on her future, the most valuable thing she ever made was already finished, sitting in a catalog they could not touch. That one song has become so valuable that people now fight over it in court. In 2022, a songwriter named Andy Stone sued her for $20 million, claiming the title matched a song he had released years earlier. A judge threw the case out and sanctioned his lawyers, ordering them to pay more than $90,000 of Mariah's legal costs. Even her own co-writer has publicly disputed how much credit she truly deserves for writing it. She also tried to trademark the phrase "Queen of Christmas," and the trademark office turned her down. When a 4-minute Christmas song is still generating lawsuits, feuds, and trademark battles 3 decades later, you understand exactly how much money is really at stake. Today, Mariah Carey is worth an estimated $350 million, built not on a beauty empire or a liquor brand, but on ownership, on the songs and the rights she controls. So step back and look at the whole board. A company paid Mariah Carey close to $50 million, structured as a non-recoupable advance and a contract termination buyout for one album, lost roughly $54 million in the process, fired the people who signed her, and eventually ceased to exist. Mariah took the money, walked away, free, rebuilt her career, and let a song she had written back in 1994 quietly become a fortune built on performance royalties, mechanical royalties, sync licensing, and master recording income, a fortune the biggest label in the world never saw coming. The most expensive deal in music history turned out to be a bet on the wrong asset. The real money was already written, in a song they could never own. If you want more stories like this one, where we trace the real money behind the famous names, subscribe and stay with us. The next one is already on your screen.